What if I told you that the most mind-bending case of my entire career happened not during my 40 years on the force, but 3 years into my retirement when I was 70 years old, sitting in my recliner, thinking my detective days were behind me forever? I'm Detective Frank Morrison, and what I'm about to tell you will challenge everything you think you know about cold cases, human nature, and the lengths people will go to keep their darkest secrets buried. It started on a Tuesday morning in October 2019. I was doing what most retirees do, reading the morning paper with my coffee, complaining about my arthritis, and wondering why the neighborhood kids couldn't keep their music down. But then my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was shaky, desperate. "Detective Morrison, this is Sarah Chen. I know you're retired, but I need your help. The police won't listen to me, and I don't know where else to turn." Now, I'd gotten calls like this before. People who thought the cops weren't taking their cases seriously, usually over property disputes or noisy neighbors. But something in Sarah's voice made me pause. There was a tremor there that spoke of genuine fear, the kind I'd heard in victims' voices during my worst cases. "What's going on, Sarah?" "My husband disappeared 3 days ago. Richard Chen, he's 45, works in accounting. But here's the thing, the police think he just left me. They say men his age do it all the time. But Detective Morrison, he didn't just leave. Someone took him, and I think I know who." I should have hung up, should have told her to keep working with the local police. But retirement had been lonely. My wife passed 2 years prior. My kids lived across the country. And to be honest, I missed the thrill of the chase. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her. Sarah Chen lived in a modest 2-story house in the suburbs, the kind of place where families plant gardens and kids ride bikes in the driveway. She was a small woman, maybe 5 feet 3 inches, with worry lines that seemed to have appeared overnight. Her hands shook as she poured coffee, and I noticed she kept glancing at the windows like she expected someone to be watching. "Tell me about your husband," I said, pulling out the notebook I'd carried for 4 decades. Old habits die hard. "Richard is a creature of habit. Every morning at 6:30 he jogged the same route, 3 miles through Oakwood Park, then back home for breakfast. He's done this for 8 years, Detective. 8 years without missing a single day, even when he was sick. But 3 days ago, he never came home." She showed me his route on a map, her finger tracing the familiar path. "I called the police after 2 hours. They found his phone by the duck pond, screen cracked like it had been thrown, but no sign of Richard. You mentioned you think you know who took him. Tell me about that." Sarah's composure cracked. "There's this man, Marcus Webb. He's been obsessed with me for months. He works at the same office complex as Richard, in the building next door. It started innocent enough. He'd say hello when I'd pick up lunch for Richard. Then it became longer conversations. He started showing up at places where I'd be, the grocery store, the library, even my yoga class." She pulled out her phone, showing me dozens of text messages. 2 weeks ago, he sent me this. The message made my blood run cold. "Richard doesn't deserve you, Sarah. He takes you for granted. You'd be happier with someone who truly appreciates you. Someone like me. Did you report this?" "I tried, but Marcus is smart. He never directly threatened anyone. The police said it was harassment at most, not enough for a restraining order. But Detective Morrison, the night before Richard disappeared, I saw Marcus parked across the street from our house. He was just sitting there, watching. Now I was interested. I'd seen enough domestic situations turn deadly to know this had the hallmarks of something serious." "What did the investigating officers say about Marcus?" "They said they'd talked to him. Apparently he has an alibi. He was at work early that morning. Several people saw him. But I know he's involved. I can feel it." Here's where my years of experience kicked in. Alibis can be manufactured, especially by someone who's been planning. And the fact that Richard's phone was found, but not his body, suggested this wasn't a random crime. This was personal. "Sarah, I need you to understand something. I'm not a police officer anymore. I can't arrest anyone, can't get warrants. But I can ask questions, and I can dig where others might not think to look. Are you prepared for what we might find?" She nodded without hesitation. "I just want my husband back." I started where I always started, with the victim. Richard Chen was an accountant at Henderson and Associates, well liked by his colleagues, no known enemies. He'd been married to Sarah for 12 years, no kids, No major debts, no gambling problems. On paper, he was the least likely person to disappear voluntarily. But people aren't paper, and everyone has secrets. My first stop was Richard's office. I still had enough connections to get past the front desk, and I spent an hour talking to his coworkers. The picture that emerged was of a man under stress. Several people mentioned he'd been working late, seemed distracted, even snapped at a colleague the week before he disappeared. He kept checking his phone, said Janet, his office manager, like he was expecting bad news. That was interesting. Sarah hadn't mentioned Richard acting differently. Next, I drove to Oakwood Park and walked Richard's jogging route. The duck pond where his phone was found was about halfway through, in a secluded area surrounded by thick trees. No security cameras, no witnesses. If someone wanted to grab a jogger, this would be the perfect spot. But something bothered me. The phone was found by the pond, screen cracked. If someone attacked Richard here, why throw the phone in a place where it would be easily found? Unless I knelt by the pond, studying the muddy bank. The police had already processed the scene, but I'd learned to see things others missed. There, partially hidden under a fallen log, I found something that made my pulse quicken. A small piece of fabric, navy blue, caught on a branch. Richard had been wearing a navy blue jogging suit the morning he disappeared, but there was something else. Footprints in the mud, partially washed away by recent rain but still visible to someone who knew what to look for. 2 sets, one matching Richard's running shoes and another larger, with a distinctive wear pattern on the left heel. I was starting to form a theory, but I needed more information. My next stop was Marcus Webb. Webb worked at Pinnacle Marketing, a mid-sized firm in the same complex as Richard's company. I told the receptionist I was conducting a background check for a potential client. Not exactly a lie, just not the whole truth. Marcus Webb was 38, single, had worked at Pinnacle for 6 years. Clean record, no complaints from coworkers. But when I asked about his relationship with the Chen family, I got some interesting responses. Marcus mentioned them a few times, said his supervisor, Tom Bradley. Said he was friends with the wife, but lately he's been, I don't know, agitated? Like he was dealing with something personal. Has he missed any work recently? Actually, yes. He called in sick the day after that jogger went missing. Said he had food poisoning. But between you and me, he looked fine when I saw him at the coffee shop that evening. The pieces were starting to fit together, but I needed proof. That's when I decided to take a risk that could have gotten me in serious trouble. I waited until after dark, then drove to Marcus Webb's apartment complex. I'd done enough surveillance in my career to know how to watch without being seen. Webb lived in a ground floor unit with a parking spot right outside his window. What I saw made my blood run cold. Through a gap in his curtains, I could see into his living room. The walls were covered with photos, dozens of them, all of Sarah Chen. Pictures taken from a distance, at the grocery store, at her yoga class, even some that looked like they'd been taken with a telephoto lens from outside her house. But it was what I saw next that confirmed my worst suspicions. In the corner of the room, barely visible, was a pile of men's clothing. Navy blue jogging pants, white running shoes, and what looked like a blood-stained t-shirt. I'd found enough evidence to call the police, but I knew it wouldn't be enough to convict. I needed more. I needed to find Richard. That's when I remembered something from my early days as a detective, a case involving a kidnapping where the victim was held in an abandoned building on the outskirts of town. The perpetrator had chosen the location because it was isolated, but still close enough to monitor. I spent the next day researching properties owned or rented by Marcus Webb. What I found was a storage unit facility on the east side of town, where Webb had rented a unit 6 months earlier, right around the time his harassment of Sarah had escalated. The storage facility was like a maze of metal buildings, each containing dozens of units. Security was minimal, just a few cameras at the entrance and a code to get through the gate. I knew I was taking a huge risk, but something told me I was running out of time. I parked outside the facility and waited until dark. The code was easy enough to figure out. I'd seen Webb's birthday on his employment records, and people are predictable when it comes to passwords. Finding his unit wasn't hard either. It was in the back section, away from the main traffic area, Unit 247. What I found inside will haunt me for the rest of my life. Richard Chen was there, but he was barely alive. He'd been tied to a chair for 3 days, given just enough water to keep him conscious. His face was bruised, his clothes torn, but his eyes, His eyes showed the terror of a man who'd seen his own death approaching. "Richard," I whispered, cutting his restraints with my pocket knife. "I'm Detective Morrison. Your wife sent me." He could barely speak, but he managed to tell me what had happened. Webb had been waiting for him at the pond, claimed he had a message from Sarah. When Richard approached, Webb had attacked him with a taser, then forced him into a van. "He's been asking me questions," Richard gasped, "about Sarah, about our marriage. He's obsessed with her. He said he was going to make her choose between saving me or being with him." That's when I heard the footsteps outside. Marcus Webb stood in the doorway, and for a moment we just stared at each other. He was holding a gun, and his eyes had the wild look of a man who crossed a line he couldn't uncross. "You shouldn't have come here, old man," he said, his voice surprisingly calm. "This doesn't concern you." "It concerns me now," I replied, positioning myself between him and Richard. "It's over, Marcus. Let me help you end this the right way." "The right way?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The right way would have been for Sarah to realize that her husband doesn't appreciate her. The right way would have been for her to see that I'm the one who truly loves her. This isn't love, Marcus. This is obsession, and it's destroying you." For a moment, I thought I might be getting through to him. His hand wavered, and I saw doubt in his eyes. But then his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his face hardened. "She called the police," he said. "Sarah actually called the police when she realized you were gone. She chose him over me. Even now, she chooses him. That's when I knew he was going to kill us both. I'm 70 years old with arthritis in my knees and a bad back. But 40 years of police work teaches you things that don't fade with age." When Webb raised the gun, I was already moving. I grabbed a toolbox from the shelf and threw it at him as I dove to the side. The gun went off, but the shot went wide. Webb stumbled, and I managed to tackle him despite my age. We fought for control of the weapon, and I'll admit, there were moments when I thought this might be how Frank Morrison finally met his end. But Richard, despite his injuries, managed to grab a wrench from the floor and strike Webb in the head. The gun clattered away, and Webb went down. By the time the police arrived, Sarah had indeed called them when she couldn't reach me. We had Webb tied up with rope from the storage unit. He was conscious but dazed, alternating between crying and mumbling about how Sarah would understand someday. The case made headlines for about a week. "Retired detective solves kidnapping case" was the angle most papers took. But the real story was about obsession, about how love can be twisted into something dark and dangerous. Marcus Webb was sentenced to 20 years for kidnapping, assault, and attempted murder. Richard Chen recovered physically, though he and Sarah both went through months of therapy. They moved to another state, wanting a fresh start away from the memories. But here's the thing that still keeps me up at night. During the investigation, we found evidence that Webb had been planning this for months. He'd been studying Richard's routine, learning about their marriage, even researching how to keep someone alive in captivity. In his apartment, we found a journal filled with fantasies about Sarah, page after page of detailed plans for how he would rescue her from her marriage, how grateful she would be once she realized he was her true love. The scariest part? He genuinely believed he was the hero of this story. This case taught me something I hadn't fully understood in my 40 years of police work. We like to think of criminals as obviously different from us, as people we'd spot in a crowd. But Marcus Webb was a regular guy. He had a job, paid his taxes, had no criminal record. His coworkers described him as quiet, but friendly. The only thing that set him apart was his inability to accept that his feelings weren't reciprocated, and that inability to accept reality turned him into a monster. 3 years later, I still get calls from people who need help, who think the police aren't listening. I take some of them, the ones that remind me why I became a detective in the first place. Not for the thrill or the recognition, but because sometimes standing between the darkness and the light is the most important thing you can do. Richard and Sarah Chen send me a Christmas card every year. They have a daughter now, born 2 years after the kidnapping. Her name is Hope, and in their last letter, they told me she wants to be a police officer when she grows up. Maybe that's the real payoff of this case. Not the headlines or the satisfaction of solving the puzzle, but knowing that evil didn't win, that sometimes, even at 70, you can still make a difference. And maybe that's why I'm telling you this story. Because somewhere out there, someone is watching someone else a little too closely. Someone is confusing obsession with love, entitlement with affection, and maybe, just maybe, hearing about Marcus Webb will help them recognize the warning signs before it's too late. The case of Richard Chen reminded me that retirement doesn't mean the end of purpose. It means the beginning of using everything you've learned to protect those who can't protect themselves. That's the truth about being a detective. The badge might be gone, but the calling never really ends.